Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into another episode of the Product Coalition podcast. This is a just-in-time podcast, is the best way I can describe this. I've thrown together this one for you as an audience because we're in a special situation right now. World leaders are telling us to work from home, and whilst we're fortunate to be in an industry that enables most of us to work from home whenever we want, that's not always the case, and it can be new for many of us. It can be new for leaders, management, board members, etc. So I'm very pleased to share this session with Tim Buzza. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Jay. Great to be here.
I'm really looking forward to talking through, and the reason why I'm so happy for those listening in to talk to Tim is this is Tim's bread and butter. This is what Tim has been living and talking about. It's his passion for well over 10 years, I'd say. So I'm really pleased to have you on the show and talk to you about this topic, Tim.
It's incredible. It has been 10 years working with businesses setting up work from home programs, but these times are unprecedented. And I was just saying before that it's like somebody's pushed fast forward into the future of work, and it's just landing on our doorsteps. And some of us prepared for it, and others aren't, which is to be expected.
Absolutely. It's, I've not heard the word work from home thrown around so many times on mainstream media as I have in the last 3-4 days. Now, for those listening in on the podcast, I just want to give a bit of an apology. I've thrown together the studio quite rapidly here. So apologies from a sound and audio perspective. We're also live streaming this on YouTube because it's such a hot topic right now. So thank you for those that are joining us on the live stream on YouTube. So, Tim, before we get stuck into the topic, I'm really keen for the audience to hear a little bit about your career background and your personal journey into distributed systems of work and how you've got to where you are today. And before you share that with us, I'd like to just share with the audience, Tim and I did work together probably about 3-4 years ago now, wasn't it, Tim?
Yeah, that would be about right, yeah.
Yeah, at IAG, which is a major insurance group in Australia. And we actually, I was very fortunate to work with Tim on an initiative or a product that was actually complements working from home and some of the strategic initiatives Tim was leading at and continues to lead at IAG. So there is a little bit of friendship and history between us. So I'm really pleased to not only share this with an industry specialist, but a good friend as well. So please, Tim, jump in and introduce yourself and give the audience your background.
Excuse me. So it's always difficult as to where to start the life story that leads you to where you are today. But my first, perhaps most relevant, is I started my working career as a welfare worker, then social worker, running meals programs for the Salvation Army, then moved into drug and alcohol, crisis counselling, emergency housing, and did that for about 6 years. I was always motivated by the need to serve the community, the need to make a difference, the need to be of service or helpful to others. But after about 6 years of doing that, it sort of came to a natural end, and I felt like I needed to look to other ways to fulfill that sort of sense of purpose. And I went to study natural medicine. And while studying natural medicine, I took a job in a call center to pay the bills. And before I kind of knew what was happening, I was in a team leader role in that call center. And I fell in love with that leadership role. I fell in love with the responsibility, with the opportunity that leadership presented to fulfill that purpose, to make a difference in people's lives. The role of a leader is quite extraordinary. You as a social worker, especially in crisis counselling, I was there for people in that moment of intense need, but it was very brief. You're kind of there to intervene, to support, to help them through that moment. But as a leader, you're with people on their life journey. You sometimes work with people and support them over many years. And so it's more of a whole person engagement. And so I did that for a long time. That was fulfilling that sense of purpose. I grew in that role, looked to make a difference by expanding that leadership scope. So it grew from managing one team to several teams to a centre to several centres with many hundreds of employees reporting through to me. And that was very rewarding, but it still got to a point where I was started to reflect and go, well, this is great that I'm having an impact on all these people's lives as their leader, as a critical kind of figure in their life. That was wonderful. But the question I was asking myself was, how could I make that influence, that impact even greater? And where that led me to was thinking about the underlying systems, the design of work, and how that could be, if I could shift that dial just a little bit, then not only would that have an impact on all of the people that were reporting to me, but if I shared those improvements, then it could have an impact across the whole industry and more broadly, hopefully across the community. So my passion then started to move into that space of how do I impact, how do I understand those underlying systems of work, understand how they're affecting people's well-being, and seek to redesign them in a way that is uplifting and to their well-being. This fundamental idea that everybody should leave a day's work not just better off financially, but better off physically, emotionally, socially, and perhaps even spiritually as a result of engaging in that activity. It's not good enough to go to work and just have it built around a do no harm principle and leave work better off financially, but actually still not better off any other way. It should deliver more to us. It's such a big part of our lives. So with that, my purpose, then I got introduced to distributed systems and systems theory, and in particular, blockchain as a sort of a modern expression of distributed systems. And that led to me thinking around, well, okay, I'm interested in the underlying systems of work. How could these new ideas of distributed systems overlay into the design of work? And could that be a means to actually create systemic change that actually made work something that did deliver on that goal of uplifting total well-being?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And then from finding your purpose to identifying opportunities, patterns, methods to change the way we work. I know you've then gone on to actually implement it and have that direct impact.
Yeah,
Could you
and
talk a bit about?
that's been extraordinary. I mean, it started with introducing work from home as kind of a significant change into that design of work and implementing that across organisations. But then looking more broadly about, well, that's impacting where we work, but there's also other dimensions of work which we can redesign, which is around when we work and also around what we do. And fundamentally, ultimately, it comes down to if we can come up with workplace systems that empower people with choice around what, when, and where they work, then we will giving people the opportunity to design their own experience of work. And if we're empowering people to do that, then there's a better likelihood that that work experience will deliver a benefit not just to them and their well-being, but also to the organisation and the many stakeholders that benefit from that activity.
So Tim, could you get us into some data on the topic? So just top line, the sort of executive summary. What are some of the insights that we know about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to distributing a team, particularly when that distribution is at home?
When implemented successfully, these distributed systems of work can have enormous benefit to the organisation and the individuals. There's no question of that. And the companies that I've worked with have all seen significant improvements in their people metrics. So most businesses are looking, especially scaled businesses, they're looking at things like their attrition rate, absenteeism, productivity levels, and so forth. And all of those metrics improve. Where it's implemented poorly, we see, I've seen businesses, and not this, not ones that I've actually worked with, fortunately, but there's certainly been stories of businesses that have reversed these distributed systems, reversed work from home, and gone back to office-based systems, perhaps due to a bias, perhaps due to not having thought through fully the implications of working this way. And if not done well, it can have negative impacts. So there's massive upside, but there's also potentially downside risk as well, like any change. And so it does take some thinking, and that's where I suppose we find ourselves right now. Is a lot of organisations are being forced into a situation where they've got to leap into this future of implementing distributed systems of work, and yet perhaps not have had the opportunity, most likely not have had the opportunity to fully think them through. And I've been having numbers of conversations in the last couple of days with various organisations who have reached out just looking for tips, because they're something that might have been in their strategic plan, might have been something that they were thinking about doing in the future, but suddenly this week they're having to implement it at scale into their business.
Yeah, I suppose not taking the first step as the right step or in the right way can be negative for everyone involved, and I believe the consequences can be quite severe if you don't understand how to respect the business from an employee's perspective, but also to respect the employee from a business perspective, and then ultimately how you maintain and manage a great customer experience in amongst this disruption, so the customers aren't paying for it overall.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what happens is there's usually 3 or 4 key risks that business executives have to think about and are top of mind for them when looking at work from home in particular, or just distributed, decentralized systems. The first is they're worried about the impact of underperformance. So there's a bit of a bias in that. There's a bias is that if people aren't adequately supervised, then they're not going to perform their role. So there's a trust gap there. And so that in itself is interesting as to where that concern comes from. And I usually find that when employees are given trust, then they will perform. And it's not about the amount of supervision that drives performance. It's actually more about the amount of trust that we're giving. So that's the first concern that executives tend to have, is it's a concern around underperformance. The next concern is that executives have is around potentially impacts to people's health. I don't think that's a genuine concern. It tends to be mainly focused on physical health. So if you read articles, and I saw one in the paper today, and there was a big section on how to set up your desk properly for OH&S and to protect your physical health. Whilst that's important, there's some interesting data there, which is that the number of lost time injury frequency rate for people working from home is lower than those with the companies I've worked with, has been lower than it was when those same people and the same workforce was predominantly working from the office. And yet, when we go out and do a risk assessment of that working environment, that person's home, it's actually riskier. So there's more potential hazards in that environment than there was in the office, yet the lost time injury frequency rate is lower. So that suggests to me that people tend to take more responsibility for their physical well-being when they're working from their home, and when they're working from the office, they kind of hand over that responsibility to the employer. So once I step through that door, it's up to them to put the slip hazard yellow triangle on the floor because there's been some water spilt. I'm not going to, if I do step in that water, then it's the employer's fault. Whereas in the home, you take responsibility. So I think that's not such a big risk, but it's always a top of mind risk. Where the real risk is with health is to do with mental and emotional well-being and the issues around loneliness. And we can go into that in a bit more detail later, because I think that's a really important topic. The next concern is around data security. And customer, and basically security around customer information. So again, the existing mitigants that employers have are usually adequate, or actually in my experience, they have always been adequate. So when most companies that have sensitive customer information, they will do police checks, they'll do reference checks at the time of hiring, they have a heap of mitigants in place there. We have other mitigants in place around understanding, sort of signals of people's behaviour, if they might be in a situation where they feel a propensity to commit fraud, and so forth. So the just because the opportunity might be higher doesn't mean the desire is any higher, basically. And so we've never seen an increase of incidents around breaches of data security, breaches of customer privacy as a result of people working remotely either. So they're the main concerns that executives have. So there's somewhat a bit of a lot of them are based in sort of biases built on on what executives currently know. And so I find that you tend to have to kind of address them and talk to them with sort of compassion and understanding. I get this as a concern, but in reality, really, there's only one underlying risk. And the underlying risk is an employee feeling a sense of disconnection. So if the employee feels disconnected, and what I define as disconnected is disconnected to the organisational values and purpose, disconnected to your teammates and colleagues, and disconnected from your manager and core support from the organisation. If you've got disconnection across all three of those levels, then the chances are the employee is feeling disconnected, feeling disengaged, therefore is likely to underperform, is more likely to commit acts of fraud or breaches of data and privacy and security, more likely to suffer injury, most likely emotional or mental, because they're feeling a sense of isolation, which is a concern. And so really, when you think about all those risks, there's really only one thing that needs to be managed for, and that is, in the design of work from home above anything else, and that is managing or designing that employee experience so that they always feel a sense of connection across those three dimensions of organizational values and purpose, their teammates and their manager. And if you get that right, then everything else seems to just fall into place.
Right. It's really interesting how it falls down to that employee experience, and that helps stand all of the other principles, value and
so what
benefit.
I think is happening, the risk is right now, as organisations rush to work from home because they have to, is that they're putting all their effort and energy into other mitigants of those risks that I went through, and not putting your energy into the core mitigant, and the most important one, the one that's actually underlying to all those risks, which is this risk of isolation and disconnection.
So, Tim, I'm going to take it up a level and firstly bring it up to a board level. So, for boards that are possibly having emergency board meetings or bringing board meetings forward due to the situation we're facing globally, what should the conversation, what should the questions be, firstly, in the boardroom between board members, particularly with regards to, obviously, the financial impacts, the employee culture, but also the employee welfare? What types of questions should they be asking each other?
The answer's kind of similar in that most boards will be interested in understanding what are the risks to the business at the moment. And I think that's the right lens for that level of the business to be thinking about the situation that the business is currently facing, and then start to once we understand those risks, it's a bit like design principles. We therefore start to understand the problem, and once you have a deep understanding of the problem, then they are able to start exploring potential solutions. So I don't really have a different answer to what I went through before. I think realistically, it is about taking a risk lens on this, definitely from a board perspective. And there's a bias in most boards and most executives to understand a problem through a risk lens. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, particularly because it can and should lead to some very, very helpful design principles to guide the organizational change.
Okay, thank you. And then bring it down to the CEO or the executive suite. So for the CEO, whether it's leading 500 or 5,000.
Mm.
Um, what, what should today look like as a remote working CEO now with a remote working workforce that's just been forced to happen in the last 48 hours? What should the CEO be doing and be mindful of from today and for the rest of the week until this situation changes?
I had a mantra in the first work from home program that I set up, which was, and to all of the leaders, which was communicate, communicate, communicate. And once you feel like you've communicated enough, communicate a bit more. And that is really the key for not. It's a key during any significant organisational change and disruption, which is of course relevant to the current context. But for any remote working workforce, the need to communicate to the point that you feel like you're over communicating is absolutely essential. And because the, uh, it's just there's massive risk there. There's massive um, uh, impact if people don't get the message. They don't feel like there's a connection back to that executive. And so they really need to be focused on building that executive, building that connection. Ultimately, the CEO is responsible for the organizational values and purpose. And really, any communication, any messaging that's coming from that level needs to be always um, representing that for that remote workforce, because that's what will guide their actions. That's what will that a remote workforce is that if any time, like any workforce, and remote's no different to the office, but if there's any level of uncertainty that the employee is feeling, and there's potential for uncertainty in the office and at home, but perhaps a little more from home, then having that values and purpose really clearly communicated and recommunicated and iterated, that becomes their kind of guiding light. If I'm uncertain around what I should do, well, I can default back to that to make a decision to move forward. And I think so. I think that's really the key for that level right now.
Great. Tim, for the people leaders within an organisation, and particularly with regards to the employee welfare, coming to work is a very social activity. We've all got a friend at work, even if we may not enjoy coming to work, or we love coming to work and we're going to be feeling very distant from our friends and from the work experience. For people leaders that may want to pick up on signs where an employee may be struggling with remote work, in this situation when it's been introduced so rapidly, what are some of the signs people leaders should be looking out for where employee engagement or emotion just may not be in check with what they're expecting? What should they be looking for?
So first of all, let's start with the problem. So the problem is that 80% of, I'm plucking the number, it depends on the report you read, but 80% of how we communicate is through body language. And that feedback that a manager might be so used to relying upon to understand the emotional state of their people is suddenly removed. And that's really the problem that leaders will be facing when they initially have work from home thrust upon them. How do they know that if it's a frontline employee? Just take the call center example. They've just had a really bad call and they're really upset, and they've just picked up their headset and thrown it to the ground, and got tears coming out of their eyes. If you saw that in the office, you'd know how to respond to it. But in the when the team's virtual, of course, the leader can't see that happening, and therefore isn't able to initiate that interaction that is needed with that employee at that point in time. So we put a lot of effort and thought into how do we flip that response so that it's the employee that is initiating that interaction with that leader. And because ultimately that's what is needed. So the leader needs to work on establishing a very, very authentic, trusted relationship with their employee so that their employee always feels safe to let them know how they're feeling and to know that they're going that communication is going to be met with respect and understanding. And so that is just basic leadership, but too often that leadership's that humanity can be missing from a workplace. And once we go virtually, leaders who don't bring that natural humanity to the way in which they interact with their people will be exposed quite quickly. So that's really probably one of the key things I'd point out around that. But really, ultimately, it comes down to the leader building that trusted, safe relationship so that the employee can initiate the contact when they need. There's more to there. Of course, there are virtual body language. Somebody who's normally engaged in a chat suddenly has gone very quiet. Perhaps their language or the way they're engaging with their colleagues on the team chat has changed tone. It's really important that the leader is participating in those sorts of team environments, and if they're not, then they're putting themselves at a significant disadvantage.
So some great tips there, Tim. There's a few notes I've just written down that bring back memories from when we were working on the initiative together. One of the things that springs to mind is when everyone's working from home, is particularly for people leaders, but just peers, you've got an opportunity to be invited into someone else's home. It's virtual. Over a video call, you're now in someone else's home. And I think that's a great opportunity to, you get to see the pictures hanging on the wall. You get to see, what their safe environment is, and hopefully it is a safe environment. That's something else we could talk about separately. But what home means to them. And I think that's a great relationship building opportunity to get to see inside the homes of so many of your work colleagues that otherwise wouldn't happen.
Absolutely. There is a level of personal connection that virtual working can stimulate, can encourage, that in-office connections don't, just because of that very fact that through video chat you're inviting somebody in, like you said, Jay. And there's no doubt we see that all the time. It kind of humanizes the interaction somewhat. Of course, the kids come into the room and then they leave again, and it just there's something very warm and lovely about that part of virtual working, and video chat is a really important tool. But there's something I think is, taking a step back. There is, we talk about this as kind of virtual work, and I tend to talk about it as 4D. So we're moving from a 3D idea of work to a 4D idea of work. And I don't use the term virtual because virtual suggests that somehow this 4D environment is less real than the 3D. And of course it's not. The human mind can't distinguish the difference between an imagined event and a real event. And it certainly can't distinguish the difference between a virtual event and a 3D event. So we tend to think of this shift that's happening, that's being thrust upon us, this sort of fast forward into the future of work that's happening right now, which is really exciting as we're making this transition from 3D into 4D. And the reason why I say that is because the 4D reality that this new work paradigm is emerging in behaves very differently than the 3D. The rules are different. It's like the rules of physics get bent. And space is the interesting one. So, as one of the many interesting dimensions of this 4D reality. So, for us to work together, we need to establish a space that we can cohabitate. And in 3D, that's bricks and mortar. We go to work, we go to the office, we cohabitate that space, and we engage and we co-create, we collaborate, we work together. But in this 4D reality that's now emergent, space needs to be created not through bricks and mortar, but more through intent. So we can build a space in the virtual world in this 4D world really quickly. You can spin one up in no time. Let's set up a chat group. Let's set up a virtual whiteboard. Let's set up a meeting room, a virtual meeting room. You can spin up these virtual spaces in no time. Much quicker than you could build a building and stick an office in it. And so that already is one big difference, is that you can spin up these spaces really quickly. But what actually gives those spaces meaning is the intent. So why I'm sort of going into this is that for this idea of connection and leadership behaviors, one of the key things that leaders can do is actually become space makers and then hold that space for their team. Frederick Laloux, who wrote Reinventing Organization, talks about this idea of space making being one of the new kind of emergent leadership qualities that we need to develop. And I think he gets the concept a little bit from yoga teachers and meditation. So a yoga teacher will usually spend a bit of time in a room before their students arrive to set the intent for that space, to create that space. And then when people walk into the room, they feel it. They feel, oh, this is very calm in here. It feels very nice. And that's because the leader in that environment, which is the teacher, has actually spent some time to set the intent for that space, and they're holding that space. And that's the kind of skill set that we need now, because the leader needs to do that. And once they create that space and they can hold that space for their team, then their team then has a place to co-create and collaborate, and the leader has a really crucial role then. So it's a significant mindset shift, I think, that leaders need to take, and they recognise they've got quite a different role now in this new virtual reality of work.
This is a really interesting line of thought, Tim. I can imagine in many instances the role of leadership in this situation is outsourced to technology. And by that, I mean, as long as people have got an internet connection and they've got a webcam, got whatever the software is to manage tasks and getting things done, my job as a leader's done today.
And it doesn't work that way, because you and I know that we've probably been part of WhatsApp groups that we've set up for a particular purpose. It's set up as an intent. Let's get together on this WhatsApp group so that we can collaborate on a particular outcome. And it has a lot of energy about it for a while, and it's really, really, it moves along, and then suddenly it just seems to die. And the technology is still there, the space is still there, but it's come to a bit of a kind of it seems to have kind of fizzled out. Now, hopefully, it's fizzled out because the objective has been met. So we've set that up to work together to achieve a particular outcome. The outcome's been achieved. That space, therefore, has reached its end of its purpose. But too often they die because the person who is the space maker and the person who's responsible for holding that space, which is not always the same person, but usually it is, has actually taken their attention away from it. They've stopped putting their energy into it. And because they have the whole energy of, and the whole the level of activity in that space has suddenly disappeared. And so that the person responsible for holding that space has such an important role to keep it energized. And, as you said, the technology doesn't do that. It's the human that does that.
Yeah, it's a whole new leadership skill that leaders are going to have to learn to rapidly create and curate a sense of community.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if they're not actively participating in it, then it disappears. And it's so easy to walk past somebody virtually and ignore them. It's so easy. Whereas physically, you just can't do it. So in this 4D world, you can just walk past somebody and ignore them without even knowing you've done it. Whereas in 3D, you'd never do that. If I walk past you in the office, I'd always say hello to you. But in 4D, I could it could just happen without me even knowing, just because I'm too much in my own head. I'm not conscious of others, and that's what happens. The other thing which go ahead. Sorry.
No, please keep going.
Well, for me, the other thing that's really interesting about this shift from 3D to 4D that we're being thrust into, I love how it's just fast forwarded. It's like I think of it like, you're probably not a child of the. I'm not sure if you're a child of the '80s, but I certainly am. I remember having
Yes.
the the Walkman, and the wrap over headset, and when you wanted to fast forward to the next track, you push play and fast forward at the same time, and it would then start making this really horrible squealing noise as the tape fast forwarded, and the headset was filled with the squealing noise until it detected a pause, and then it would stop, and then it would play the next track. And it feels to me like right now we're in this transition period where all we're hearing is the squealing noise. Like suddenly somebody's pushed fast forward on our Walkman, and we're getting this squealing noise and chaos, and it's really unpleasant. But we're actually fast forwarding to this new paradigm of work, and it's really an exciting time. Like for me, this is the most exciting time of my life, like from a career perspective. Not to discount the stress and the fear that a lot of people are feeling right now, but it is incredible. We've been fast forwarded into this new reality where we're shifting from 3D to 4D, and that's a whole level of uncertainty that's creating for people. People who have jobs that are built in the 3D, their jobs, like if you're a flight attendant or a pilot or a waiter in a cafe, or you've got an entirely 3D based work, and job, then your job's probably, you're deeply concerned, and I feel for those people. But for those people like you and I and others that are already started to transition ourselves into this 4D, this is really an exciting time, because suddenly you're seeing the rest of the world coming and joining us, and having to learn about the differences and what that looks like. So we talked about space, but for me, the other big transformation that's happening in what's the difference between 4D and 3D is the experience of time. So when we're working virtually, when we're working in this 4D way, yes, a minute's still a minute and an hour is still an hour. But that's only one way to think about time, the ticking hand on the clock. The other way to think about time is as a flow of information. So, and in this 4D reality, the flow of information, the amount of information that we can download as human beings when we're engaged with work in a virtual way. I mean, I was talking to you before, I've got 4 screens in front of me right now. It's phenomenal. Like the flow of information that we can tap into and we can participate in this 4D work world compared to 3D, they're just exponentially different. I mean, I went to the library the other day because I love working at the library. It's a lovely space in Melbourne. We've got a new renovated library, but I don't ever look at a book. It's just a nice space. I went there and I was doing some research on loneliness, relevant to the earlier conversation, and really interested in this experience of loneliness and disconnection and what it means to people. And in a couple of hours I was sitting there Googling, searching, reading various academic papers and so forth, I would have absorbed more information than probably 3 days of walking around the library, pulling books off the shelf, going back to the cards, looking for the next book and so on. So that's just an example of what this sort of 4D experience is like. Suddenly the flow of information that we can expose ourselves to is next level, which means that our experience of time when working in 4D is so different. Today I was having a conversation with a colleague, and I started talking about this conversation I'd had with him previously, like it was last week. And then I realized halfway through that it was only yesterday afternoon that I had that same conversation, but it felt like it had been literally a week since then to now, because the flow of information is so much higher. It impacts our experience of time. So space is different, time is different. Time and space are decoupled because of synchronistic and asynchronistic working, and communication. It's a completely different paradigm. And no wonder people are feeling uncomfortable about it. No wonder leaders are going, holy crap, how do I even manage people in this space? People have been thrust into it and they're not prepared for it. It's so different. Yeah. It's so exciting because what we can do there is just next level.
Tim, in relation to this, we spoke earlier about the at-home assessments that you've done. I mean, from a career perspective, I'm guessing you've probably been exposed to over 1,000 people and their at-home working setups over the last is. But I remember, we spent about a year working together in this space, and I do particularly remember on the research side, in the discovery phase, meeting and discussing people and understanding their lives. And one of the things that I took away that had a real strong impact, that many people come to work to escape home. And that may be because they're exposed to maybe a very sick relative at home all day, every day. So coming to work takes them away from that and exposes them then to social conversations, as opposed to confronting the sickness of that person at home. There's also maybe domestic abuse at home, or being exposed to someone that you just don't get along with, or even if it's not a home, if you're in a house share, a housemate that now you and a housemate don't get along, and now you're forced into the house for many times. For people that are now working at home or from home, and they're now exposed to things that make them unhappy or unsafe, how should they approach having a conversation with their organisation to support them, not come to the office, but also be safe at home?
Yeah, look, it's a really important question. And first of all, when we have always designed flexible working and work from home, we've designed it from a principle around, if somebody is choosing to work from the office, choosing to work 9 to 5, and they're not doing it because of any organisation or pressure, that's just because that's the way that they want to work and what works best for them, then that's still flexible working. That's still empowered working. And so we've always taken that approach, and I think it's a really important thing that we give people choice. Hang on. Sorry, I think my computer just went to sleep. Don't know if it made a difference to the conversation.
I'm here. No, all good.
So the next thing is then, okay, that's all fine. It's great, it's fine and dandy. That's what you'd normally do. But right now we're in a situation where organisations are kind of forcing people to work from home, or the government is, or somebody is. That's very, very difficult, and it gets back to the manager having the right relationship with their employee. It always seems to come back to that in these situations. People need to be treated as individuals. They need to be respected as individuals, and we need to not get hung up on this idea of having to treat everybody consistently. It's just an absurd concept that comes out of an industrial age kind of mechanical view of an organisation. We should be able to treat people individually and consider their circumstances individually, and not be worried about, what happens if we create a precedence for somebody else, and et cetera, et cetera. That's just industrial thinking. If you get into, we're more complicated than that, and we need to allow the space for that.
Respect it. Tim, we've been, obviously a lot of the focus is all on where you work right now, but when you work changes, you mentioned earlier, and the ability all of a sudden for you to go and check in on a loved one, pick children up from school, because it's only 15 minutes away from your home as opposed to an hour away from the house. How can employers, people leaders, businesses now change the way they think about when people are working? And obviously there's examples when that can't be flexible, but there is, particularly in the technology industry, that can certainly happen. But for businesses that's new to, what does a change of mindset look like for thinking about when we work?
It's a really interesting and exciting change, I think, that we're just starting to explore as a community around empowering people to have more control over their time. I touched briefly on this idea that in this 4D way of working, time and space start to separate a little bit. So as we start to embrace this more virtual way of working, in order to come together to co-create and collaborate and work together, in 3D, the way that works is that we go into a room and we're there at the same time in the same place, and that's how we work together. In this 4D reality, which we're moving into, only thing that's really important is that we have this this shared space where we can co-locate. But we don't necessarily have to be in that space at the same time, because there are new communication tools that support more asynchronistic styles of communication. So the example is, Slack, and how people use Slack, and there's lovers and haters of Slack, but still it enables asynchronistic communication. So that's kind of the first thing, just to sort of set up the context. So we are able to empower people to have more control over their time in this 4D future of work, because they no longer need to be working as in as synchronistic a way as they used to in the 3D world. And that, in giving people power over their time, has a profound impact, an extraordinarily profound impact on people's well-being. The old industrial thinking was that when you arrived at work, you clocked on and you stamped your card, and you went from your time onto company time. And then at the end of the day, you stamped your card and you went from company time back onto your time. Now, that's just an absurd idea, that my time is no longer my time. It's now owned by somebody else. It's like I'm going into servitude when I stamp that card, and then and I stamp it and I go back to my time again. It's always my time, and it should never be anybody else's time. And I should have control over my time, and I should feel empowered with that time. And when we take that power away from people, or when they give it up to a company or entity, that's very, very impactful on identity. And then there's the obvious ripple effects it has in people's lives, because that means they're having to make compromises that otherwise they maybe wouldn't want to make. So like you suggested, maybe it's about caring for parents or children or other things. They're compromising those things that really matter to them because they're committing time and to an organization, when really what they're really committing is their attention and effort to deliver an outcome. And as work moves more towards that, then we can start to empower people more with their time. So it's I think we're just scratching the surface. As you know, we worked together on developing an app that empowered people to have control over their time in the call centers, giving them the ability to make changes to their rosters using decentralized systems and tokenization and virtual currencies and all. It's amazing. It's incredible. And the impact that that's had on people's well-being we were so taken by the stories that we were hearing coming back from the experiments, that we decided we needed to find a way to measure this. And we ended up using the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Score. And what we saw was a nearly 10-point uplift in self-assessed mental and emotional well-being on this WEMBS score. And that's not a small lift on the WEMBS. That's actually quite a significant uplift. So just by giving people back control over their time, the ability to make changes to their roster without having to get approval or talk to the organisation, had this massive impact on people's self-assessed mental well-being. So it's crucially important. I hope that this forced shift to decentralized distributed working that's happening right now does extend beyond the concept of empowering people to have choice over where they work, to actually starting to give people more choice over when they work. And there's some very good organizational reasons for that too, which is to do with chronobiology and enabling people to actually do the types of work that they do best at different types of day. And we're all different. So if you can empower people to make those choices, like for me, I get up at 4 a.m, and between 4:30 and 6:30, I have, that's what Cal Newport calls monk mode. I'm in this great sort of highly focused monk mode and just smash it out. And then, basically I've done a day's work in that 2 hours. And then the rest of the day is this sort of stuff, which I love. So
brilliant. Yeah. For those that want to demonstrate or evidence that what's happening right now is for the better, and it may not be in every organisation, and want to demonstrate that there's more value in this. And I'll come back to a different point. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But for those that want to demonstrate evidence and value in this new way of working remotely, where there's more commitment, more intention behind working remotely and working with more flexibility, well, obviously none of this was planned or set up. So the ability to put things in place to measure the success of this possibly isn't there for many organisations. They're going to just have to go off gut feel or some surveys at the end of next week. But what are some of the metrics, or what are some of the data points staff can do to lead the way to illustrate this is more valuable for the organisation, for the employee, and for the customer?
Yeah, I hope that when the panic of the moment starts to settle down and people can start to reflect, everybody's reacting and making quick decisions because that's what they need to do, and that's perfectly okay. But my hope is in the next week or so that people do ask that question. It's like, okay, we've been forced to conduct a massive experiment. What can we learn from this experiment? What insights can we get? And just asking those questions is the starting point. Now, some of the things I would look at is whether an organisation has Net Promoter Score or an engagement survey or some sort. Most big companies do, and it's mainly the big companies that are kind of doing this at the moment. They would probably already have quarterly surveys or 6 monthly surveys to measure employee sentiment. Hopefully, they would have the capability to bring one of those forward and do it in the next couple of weeks and just see if there has been a shift and look at the verbatims and what people are saying. Because ultimately, if employees are saying that they're enjoying it, they're happier, and this is great, then you're onto something. Then it's just about refining it.
Brilliant. So have a really strong retrospective and talk to people after. Don't go back
to use product language, Dave. Beautifully said.
Seize it as an opportunity to learn. Don't let it pass you by. So Tim, I've written down a bit of a run sheet. Obviously, from a product coalition perspective, I've moved to Europe. I was planning to do a European tour. That's obviously cut short. So I've been working remotely in isolation. The product coalition is me, but I'm very fortunate to have a strong community on Slack. But I've written a bit of a run sheet of what I would do for anyone new to remote working, more so when you're doing it 5 days a week, like going pro with working remotely and not in an office. So I want to bounce a few things that I've just noted down here and keen to see if it triggers any other insights or learnings from you. So the first one, so these are my I would. So I'd set the alarm, get up when the alarm goes off, shower, grab a coffee, and eat properly for breakfast. So starting the day just as I would is if I had to go and get on a train or tram. Now, the key one for me on that is setting the alarm. When you don't have a commute, you tend to set the alarm for later, and instead of making the most of time. Obviously not for yourself, Tim, because you get up at 4 a.m. But when you don't have a commute, you might stay up later, you might get up later, and so your schedule can shift, and you could start to grab an extra Netflix episode because you haven't got a commute in the morning, and then you do start to lose quality of sleep, etc. So any thoughts or advice with regards to getting a solid night's sleep and starting the day for those working from home, Tim?
There's a popular idea that you can divide workers into segregators and integrators. So segregators are people who like to have work as this sort of separate part of their life that's very compartmentalized, and usually they have very little, therefore work from home has very little appeal for them. They like to have work as this kind of separate thing, and then the rest of their life is what it is, and the two don't overlap. And then there's the integrators who love the idea of work from home, and I would probably describe myself as an integrator, and I'm really happy for work to kind of happen anytime, anywhere, any place. Like I love my work, I love what I do, and therefore I'm really happy for it to kind of sort of coexist with everything else in my life. And so it's worth reflecting on that, because I think the answer to the question is dependent upon whether or not you're an integrator or a segregator.
Nice.
The irony is that the segregator might have less attraction to working from home, and given the choice would probably not do it, but right now is likely finding themselves having to do it. Why I say it's ironic is because the segregator is probably the person who's actually going to make it work in the most healthy way most easily, because they're going to quickly establish those routines. They're going to set up their office so that it's separate from the house. They'll probably set it up really nicely. The segregator tends to have a really lovely set up desk at the at the workplace. It's their space, and they're going to do the same at home. They're going to establish the routines, like you said, just naturally, because that's important to them, so they can keep that sort of line, that demarcation line, really clear to them and everybody else in the household. And so they're going to find the balance much more naturally, and they're going to create that balance much more naturally than the integrator. So less likely to want to work from home, probably more likely to set it up properly, naturally, without having to think about it too much. It's kind of intriguing. Whereas the integrator, somebody like me, can just suddenly, I was talking before about the influx of information and how time can just disappear really quickly when you're working from home. I can get up at 4 a.m. and still be, what's the time now? I don't know. It can be 8 o'clock at night and I'm still going. And that's not healthy. I look at my Apple Watch and the rings haven't even moved. And I've been working for 12 hours. It's like if I was working in the office, I would have been up and down stairs and in between meeting rooms. I would have got my steps. I haven't even come close. Yeah. So it's actually the integrators, the ones that love working from home, are probably the ones that have to be more conscious of the sorts of things you suggested. Yeah.
I can see my good friend James Woodley on the live chat on YouTube here. And I know James actually has a commute in the morning. So even if that's a walk around the block, that's his commute. So he does something
it's great.
very deliberate to actually force, okay, this is me, it's my 5-minute walk around the block. When I get back to the back door, I'm walking into the office. And that enables him to set up a mindset.
James, I love it. I had a mum working for me, and she had a young family and a 2-year-old who was very attached to her. And she had an office that was separate from the house. And if her child saw her go to the work, then the child would just be banging on the door all day, because the child knew mum was in there. So what she used to do was get up like she was going to work, put her clothes on, and leave, and walk around the block and say bye, see you later. And then she'd enter the office through the garage, because she had an entrance through there, so that she could actually get to work and basically not be disturbed. So there's all sorts of hacks we have to come up with balancing family and work.
Yeah. So some of the other points I've written down is around giving people a call. Sometimes you can sit there for 6 to 8 hours and not speak to anyone all day. And it quite often surprises me how I can sit behind that computer and not talk to anyone. And when I then go to speak to someone, it's almost like my voice box isn't working.
That's so true. So this is another kind of myth busting. The segregator and integrator is sort of interesting one, because segregator is less likely to be interested in working from home, but probably better suited to work from home, and they'll create healthy practices more easily. And then there's another myth out there, which is that extroverts are not suited to work from home. Introverts, it's perfect for them. Let them, go and retreat to their cave and just, that's their perfect environment. They love it. It's, and actually it's the opposite. The introvert, I had a recruiter working for me when we were setting up our first work from home program, and I was describing the sort of person I wanted to hire, and she said, "You're looking for initiators." And I was like, yes, that's exactly right. So the extrovert gets their energy from other people. They need to interact with other people, and they'll feel the absence of those interactions. So they will make the effort throughout the day. They will pick up the phone, they'll ring somebody, they'll check in on people, they'll create those human interactions, which is so, so important for our well-being. Whereas the introvert, putting them into an office, a home office, letting them retreat into their little cave, is actually probably the worst possible thing for them.
Mm.
And so they're not going to be initiators. They're probably, I don't want to disturb that person, or I better not ring them. I don't know what they're doing right now, and they're going to be cautious and not initiate those human interactions that we all need. So, the moral of the story: hire extroverted segregators, and you've got the perfect work from home workforce.
Next up, I've got around contact people you wouldn't normally contact because you've got an opportunity to. And by that, I mean it might be your nan, your aunt, an old friend that you've been meaning to ping a message to on Facebook and give them a call. But it actually opens up when you've not got a commute, be it 20 minutes to 2 hours each day, you've got 20 minutes to 2 hours back. And that's a great time to live out some of your other values beyond work.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Nothing to add to that, but just to say, do it.
And
Make use of that time.
next one I've got is I find that I don't drink as much water at home as I would do in the office. So I always keep a glass next to me, and when it's half empty, go and fill it up, because that also forces me to stand up and walk around, because it's easy to be much more lethargic when working from home.
Getting healthy habits at home, it requires some self-awareness. So, the sort of mindful practices to catching yourself. Have I been drinking water? Am I eating well? I mean, if you're really health conscious, working from home is probably your dream, because you can cook a really healthy meal for yourself every day. I love juicing. Like, I love to replace meals with fresh juice, and I found that really difficult to do in the office. But when I'm working from home, it's a breeze. But what is also available to me at home are snacks. So that's that's a trap. Like, the home can mean cooking lots of and eating healthy meals. It also can mean snacking all day. Depends which devil I'm listening to on which shoulder. And I agree with you on the water thing. I absolutely agree. It's just a really, really good idea.
And
I
similarly,
practice the same habits. I have bottles of water going all day.
right. Similarly, with the supermarket situation right now and the chaos that is there, many may resort to getting Deliveroo or Uber Eats or the delivery food options. Keep yourself in check if you're going down that route, because it's easy to eat much heavier, larger meals when they're being cooked and served up for you.
If you're an integrator, these are all traps to watch out for. Make sure you get out, do some exercise, get your steps, get into some good routines. And routines will actually help drive all those behaviors as well. Like you said, set the alarm and so forth. If you get the routines right, they almost become the scaffolding for the rest of your day. So if you can set those routines, then, there's lots of different ways of thinking about and experiment. Try different routines, find what works for you. And once you find one, just make that what it is, and you'll find that everything else kind of then falls into place.
Brilliant. And the last thing I've got here is I keep a diary of what I tick off during my day. I did notice early on that for some reason it can feel less rewarding working from home. You can get a lot more done sometimes, but you don't have a sense of achievement because you're not talking and communicating as you're walking past people's desks or over a coffee, etc., around your achievements. So keeping a note of your achievements throughout the day so that you can reflect on that, I've found helped me feel like I'm completing what I'm setting out to achieve.
Yes, but then you can also set up your space to access different states of mind that probably you couldn't as comfortably in an office environment. Like it's kind of like a therapist couch in a way that's behind my desk. And so if I'm wanting to really access that kind of subconscious, that creative mental space, I'll go and I can just get out of my chair, go and lie on my couch. I've got my wall with post-it notes. I can just kind of get into that kind of really kind of slightly crazy creative vibe much more easily than I could in a conservative working environment like an insurance company. So, we weren't working in a place where you had sleep pods. It was quite conservative. And so, if you wanted to get into that sort of mad creative energy going, it's, certainly I feel more comfortable doing that in my home than I do in a conservative working environment. So it's all about using the space. It's such a great opportunity. I mean, to have this flexibility to be able to design work in a way that works best for you. That's what it comes down to. And that is all about, it's about health. It's about well-being. It's about, being able to access this other states of mind. It's about it's finding. I mean, so maybe I'll just touch. I know we're probably going to go over time, but my kind of routine that I've learned is I get up at 4 a.m. in the morning. That really works well for me. I get up and I do that. I don't have my coffee. I sit down. I get into monk mode, and I just smash it out. And then I will have some breakfast. Then I will take the dog for a walk for about an hour. And that's lovely time. I go and meditate in the park. It's wonderful. I come back, I feel refreshed. And it's only then that I'll have a shower, and it's like my day starts again. It's like it's a whole brand new day. I already had one day, now I've got another day. And at that point, I can come in, and then everybody else is kind of at work. And so I can get in and do the kind of normal stuff and interact with my work colleagues as I need to. And then after lunch, I'm kind of, I might go and have a bit of an afternoon nap, and that then resets me again, and then I'm back into work once more. It's just those kind of, I have these resets. One's a walk with the dog in the shower, the other one's an afternoon nap, and it just works. I could never do that in the office. It's just not possible.
That's flexibility. And for me, Tim, from our time working together a few years ago and that year we spent working together, there's a point that I've written down here that has always stuck with me, and that is that for anyone who's currently setting up remote working and empowering their staff to work remotely, be mindful that it's very different setting up remote work versus flexible work.
Mm-hmm.
And be intentional about that decision. Are you empowering your staff to do what they do remotely? Or are you now empowering your staff to do what they do with flexibility? And it's always stuck with me for many years.
The question is the intent. It gets back to intention again. Is the business setting up remote work to solve a business problem? Or are they setting up remote work to solve a human problem? Right. And it's such a big difference in intention. And if you're setting it up to solve a business problem, then the chances are you've got blind spots that could result in you creating experiences for the employees that are unhealthy and unhelpful. If you're setting it up to solve the human problems of enabling people to live healthy, balanced lives, then you're going to set it up for success. Now, if it's the business problem that gets you to start considering it, fantastic, because it means you're heading in the right direction, but then bring the humanity in as quickly as possible and make the why you're doing it as much as possible about the human problem, not just the business problem. And the answers will emerge, and it'll be a success.
Thank you so much for your time, Tim. I've really enjoyed talking through so many points with regards to staying healthy, working well, creating value, and ensuring that hopefully anyone listening to this takes some value and improves their practice of working flexibly or remotely. So thank you so much for giving us at such short notice in the midst of all that's going on, your time, Tim. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Really enjoyed the conversation and really excited about where work is going and the future. It's an incredible time to be alive.
Indeed. For those listening to the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been a very special episode. Please check out Product Coalition on your favorite podcast player. You'll find a whole heap of podcasts. As I said at the start, we're a product management community of 500,000 readers, 6,000 Slack members, and thousands of podcast listeners. And right now I am meant to be traveling Europe interviewing product leaders to gain their insights and education and share that with the global community. That will all be done remotely now due to what's happening. So I'm going to take away many learnings from this session. Thank you all for listening to the podcast, and I'll bring you another episode very soon. Thank you.